Good evening to all the participants. Our distinguished speaker is held up. He'll join us very shortly. In order to save time, what I would be doing is I will be briefing you. I'll be giving you an intro of the speaker, and meanwhile, we can expect him to join. Hopefully, we'll save some time that way. As you know, the topic is about transforming the science and technology ecosystem to people, India's emergence as an innovation-led economy. Our distinguished guest for the day is Mr. Jayant Krishna, who's the CEO of Fast India. As usual, we'll have the first 20 minutes presentation by Mr. Jayant Krishna, followed by the question and answer session. We have received a number of questions from all our participants. Mr. Jayant Krishna is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation of Advancing Science and Technology, Fast India. It's an organization that seeks to bring about transformational change in India's science and technology landscape. Good evening, Dr. Krishna.
Hi, good evening. I'm really sorry for being late. There was some mess up about the date, but so I'm in a mall. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
And see me clearly?
All right. Yeah, we can see you clearly also.
Okay. And sorry, I'm being very casually dressed because I was not prepared for it.
Absolutely not an issue. I think it's your insights which will make all of us enlightened and give us ideas on what we could participate in.
Sure.
Yeah. So what I do is, the format of the session is we have an introduction of the speaker, and then we hand over the stage to you for you to present, and that's about 20-25 minutes. And then after that, we have a question and answer session. We collect these questions at the time of registration, and there will also be questions when the webinar unfolds. And both of these we would be covering. We'll be covering it as clusters by both Professor Sudhakar Rao and me. In fact, he's just held up and he should be joining us very shortly also.
Sure.
So I'll share the screen on the introduction. Dr. Jayant Krishna is currently the CEO of Foundation for Advancing Science and Technology. So this organization is intended to foster change in India's science and technology landscape, very much needed. The distinguished speaker has a career of over 3 decades. Much of it has been in the TCS, and later he has been in various very important assignments. He was in the Prime Minister's Skill India mission as CEO, Executive Director, and CEO. That's a ringside view of what happens in the skill space. He was also the first Indian group CEO for the United Kingdom India Business Council. And earlier, he's also headed the Executive Director, Public Policy, headed research at the Silicon Valley Nonprofit Fund. He's also been Senior Fellow in the US-India Policy Studies at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He serves on the board of directors of a number of companies. It's a very distinguished profile, and thank you very much, sir, for joining this series of the WiseViews Leadership Conversation. I hand over the stage to you and request you to make your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, and apologize once again for the confusion about the date and therefore almost a 10-minute delay in joining. So if we look at the world around us, it has really transformed into an innovation-led economy. If you look at the growth in the economies all over the world, it has been driven by exponential progress in science and technology. The leading nations of the world, be it US, China, Japan, UK, Germany, all Canada, Australia, they are all, basically the growth was fueled by vibrant ecosystems that existed or they were created to commercialize research. We all know about the advent of internet around 1992, and followed by smartphones, followed by artificial intelligence. And if you look at any space, biotechnology, for example, the kind of non-linear progress which has happened in biotechnology is mind-blowing. With looming disruptions in neuroscience, quantum computing, and so on and so forth. So let's compare China and India for some time, because that's very, very important. So what happened if you look at Chinese history in 1978-79? China embarked upon major economic reforms, almost 12, 13 years before India did that in 1991. And these reforms worked wonders. China started becoming the global manufacturing hub. A lot of cutting edge work they started. And whatever excess tax collection and the enthusiasm that was generated by Chinese economic reforms in early 90s, around the same time when India was embarking upon the economic reforms, they used the money through economic reforms and plowed it majorly into science and technology, into university ecosystem, into science and technology labs, and so on and so forth. They did that big time. So, and as a result of which, in some areas, especially let's look at artificial intelligence. Today, the work that happens, the research work that happens in China in artificial intelligence, you'll be shocked to hear is much more advanced than what happens in in the US, despite the fact that it all started in the US. So I think these things we have to be very, very careful. The mistake India did, despite the fact that our economic reforms in the early 90s are also quite successful, but we did not use, and the nation started becoming a bit richer, with the GDP growth, which used to languish at about 2 to 3% per annum. The average became 7 to 8 or some, several years, 8 to 9% per annum. But we did not plow back, that money, that wealth that got created in the nation for our, improving our university ecosystem, our science and technology labs, and so on and so forth. So that we did not do for whatever, for the reasons known to the politicians and the bureaucrats. So I think this is, India as a country, we were among the first few countries, which actually adopted scientific temper in its constitution itself through the 42nd Amendment in 1996, where we said that it will be the duty of every citizen to develop a scientific temper, humanism, spirit of inquiry. Now, spirit of inquiry is nothing but the spirit of research, and reform. So, despite a constitutional focus, we did not do much to usher in transformative reforms either in our universities or the science and technology ecosystem. So as a result of which, despite the fact, India has the economic scale, we have become the 5th largest economy in absolute terms. We have a vast talent pool, large market size, and a very, very vibrant, startup ecosystem with more than 100 unicorns. All that is there, but despite the fact since we did not invest much in our research, science and technology research, and not much of efforts to translate it to unlock huge economic value. We know that we remain a far cry from being a innovation-led economy today, despite the fact that in absolute terms our economy has become the 5th largest in the world. So I mean, as I said, no transformational reforms have happened in India's science and technology sector. Independence, the ease of doing research in our country continues to be poor. Some of the scientists and the professors in the universities, they tell us that sometimes even as much as 2/3 of their time goes into not research but into managing the administrative drudgery around the research work. And the procurement is difficult, procurement of equipment or consumables. Research is not as collaborative, and because of all these gaps, our science and technology, our ease of doing research in science and technology remains very poor. Our 90% of our science and technology institutions are in the government setup, largely central governments, some in the state governments, and they are riddled with their own bureaucracy, leadership issues, and with very little adoption of global best practices. Universities, see, we are perhaps one of the very few countries in the world where the science and technology labs, the major labs, and the universities, they exist in two different universes. They are they are separate from each other, and therefore the kind of, at a time when the research all over the world is becoming more collaborative and more cross-domain. In our case, this is I mean, there's a very little collaboration that happens in research across domains, across disciplines, and so on and so forth. Research institutions in our country. Am I audible clearly?
You're absolutely audible.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Our research institutions generally lack accountability, and there's a lack of competitive spirit amongst them, and they function in isolation rather than in a collaborative manner. Our procurement rules are such which keeps the labs away from getting the best in class equipment as well as consumables. That continues to be a problem. There's a lack of incentive for good researchers. The HR policies that these labs and universities have, that they have, they are not as merit driven as it should be, and it breeds some kind of a mediocrity in the researchers community as well as in the early career scientists. The PhD scholars that we have, I mean, unless somebody is very, very lucky to get a very spirited guide, which will be 1 or 2 out of 100, most of our research scholars are continue to be quite, they're almost like an orphan tribe with no hand holding, paucity of funds, even in some cases, the research money, the stipend also doesn't come on time. And majority of them have an absolute disconnect with the world, So, and some of the good measures which Government of India has taken in the recent past, like Institutes of Eminence, I thought is a very, very good scheme to give a differential treatment to the creamy layer of our universities, or, the ICERs, which were pure science after 12th undergrad programs. And of course, they have postgraduate and PhD programs also. They started and they were on the lines of IIT. So they've really done very well in terms of selection of students and selection of faculty. But somehow, because we have not corrected the entire value chain, therefore, after an undergrad degree from ICERs, majority of students, 80% of them go abroad. And a majority of those who go abroad, like the early days of IITs, they do not come back because those are merit-based countries. They look at the merit of Indian students and they get sucked into the system, the kind of compensation, the kind of standard of life which they are given, they do not happen in India. So I think India, it's very, very important that we address structural changes in many of those things, that I just talked about. India is the 5th largest economy, but if you look at our spend on science and technology, it's just about 0.64%, which is, you'll be shocked to hear, which is among the lowest among BRICS nations. The US spends almost 2.73% of its GDP. First, the GDP size itself is big, and the percentage is also higher. And South Korea, a much smaller country than India in terms of GDP, they spend almost 4% of their budget in science and technology research. The OECD countries spend almost 2.3%, and we spend just 0.6764%, and almost 2/3 of this 0.64% of our GDP that India spends is done by government, and only 1/3 comes from the industry. Now, this trend in the US and China is almost the opposite. Industry does 2/3 of the funding, if not 3/4, is done by the industry for R&D, and only anywhere between 1/4 to 1/3 is actually done by the government. And results are known. If you look at the QS ranking of universities worldwide, sorry, we have only 3 universities that feature, Indian universities that feature in the top 200. Which is ISC Bangalore, IIT Bombay, and IIT Delhi. They're the only 3 institutions which figure there. You look at our research impacts ranking, by way of citations, we ranked 10th, and so our research impact rating is almost is 10th among all countries, and obviously US is at the top at the number 1, and China is number 2 in terms of research impact by citations. If you look at the Bloomberg's Global Innovation Index, we rank 46th, and I mean, that's some kind of to my mind, it's a matter of shame. And if you look at the intellectual property ranking by GIPC, we rank 40th out of 53 countries which were surveyed for intellectual property. If you look at the World Talent Index, I mean, on one hand, we say we are the 2nd most populous state. Our population is going to take over China's within a few years' time. but look at the irony is how many of them represent the world-class talent and the skilled and educated people. There our rank is almost 59th in the world. So these are the things which we as a nation must be concerned about. Look at the World Economic Forum's Global Competitive Index. We rank 72nd, kind of a thing. So unless we fix all these things, our march towards becoming a $5 trillion economy or $10 trillion economy by 2035, will remain a pipe dream. So it's very, very important that we address these kind of things. See, it's not that we have nothing. We have a very good base. See, why is it that if you look at the top 20 tech companies in the Silicon Valley, almost half of them, not just the Google and Microsoft or Adobe or IBM, but almost half of them have Indians as their CEOs. And they're not the Indians whose parents had migrated. Except one or two, majority of the cases, they are the ones who did their first degree in India and then went there for masters and some of them for PhDs, and the rest is history. So we have to look at it. Why is it? And not just these, you look at scientists in UK and US, 12 to 14%, 15% are of Indian origin. Indian students are the second largest group in UK and US universities, next only to China, and very, very comparable to China. If China has 25%, we may have 23, 24%. So what we have to look at, why is it that our people, they shine abroad when they go outside of the country, they shine and they languish here. We have to look at it that why is it the ease of doing research is poor, the not just compensation. I think it's a general environment that our system has is not conducive to the most meritorious people. I think these kind of things, if you look at the base, we have 1,000 plus universities, 10,000 plus science colleges, 15 lakh schools, Indian Institute of Science, 23 IITs, 31 NITs, which used to be RDCs earlier, 7 ICERs, and a fair amount of very, very good private universities also, kind of a thing. We have a network of 38 CSIR labs, 64 Indian Council of Agriculture research labs. The defense lab, the DRDO ones are almost 50. ISRO centers are 21. There are 5 atomic energy centers. And so these add up to almost 400. But overall science and technology labs in the country, you put together the number I'm told is almost 1,400. So we have the base, I think there's some ray of hope. The new education policy, which was launched in 2020, it talked about the only research universities, which was a good beginning. They also talked about a national research foundation with a funding of almost 50,000 crores spread over 5 years. I think these are excellent initiatives by Government of India. And, to my mind, if they are implemented in the right earnest and the spirit, they'll go a long way in making India an innovation-led economy through science and technology research route largely, So as I said, we have the world's third largest, base of, startups, including many unicorns. We have a good telephone density, almost close to 60% smartphone penetration in the country, almost 80 crore internet users we have in the country. I think these are all is not lost. We have created a good base. The government and the industry as partners have created a good base, but we have to reform science and technology sector big time. And I would go to an extent of saying that, let 2022 to 2030, next 8 years, there could be a decade for transformation of India's science and technology sector. I very strongly feel. There are lots of challenges. We have to create the political salience. We have to have help. If you look at the theory of change, we have to create the political salience, because the economic reforms, the problem was so obvious and written all over the place. Various international rating agencies had lowered our ranking big time. Our balance of payment position in early 90s had gone bad. So our economic reforms were a reaction to that, and led by Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was one of the finest economists in the world. So therefore they developed a lot of results. But for science and technology reforms, there is no consensus in the country. So how do you create a consensus? How do you ensure that, there is a salience you create among politicians, among bureaucrats, and so on and so forth, Science, as I said, National Research Foundation is a very, very good tool to do up. Ease of doing science improvement is extremely very, very important. We need to create centralized research and industry interfacing and fundraising offices in our universities and labs. They're very, very important. Very few universities have a centralized, robust, and thriving research cell, which is a common resource center for the entire university, or the lab, We have to, the funding value chain needs to be optimized by streamlining research proposal submission, evaluation, as well as disbursements along, a robust and seamless technology backbone. Procurement law rules, many of them are outdated. They need drastic reforms. That's very, very important. The compensation structure, along with revision is very, very important. Because unless we pay our scientists, unless we pay our academics, at par with the average industry compensation, if not the top end industry compensation, how do you expect people to get into academics and research? How do you expect people to become scientists? They're not saints, right? So government has to relook at their compensation structure very, very clearly. That's very, very important. And more than that, within the entity, there has to be progressive science and technology policies and a performance centricity. That's very, very important. As I said, another thing that comes to my mind is that lots of science and technology, in our country, we are among the very few countries where universities and science and technology labs are separated and they're under different ministries and they rarely talk to each other. I think we need to, what do we do? I mean, one idea that comes to our mind is perhaps we need to create mega clusters, either based, in in specific geographies or based on specific themes, And these people can start collaborating on research, pool resources. Somebody, I mean, just to give an example, if you look at the research equipment required, so in that cluster, if there are 3 universities, if there are 5 labs, and those kind of things, I'm sure those put together, there'll be a lot of resources, which can be taken as a joint resource, and these. So some of them could be functional mergers, some of them could be hard mergers, some of them could be soft mergers, and this kind of a thing will eventually make our economy more competitive globally. So more collaborative research, democracy in utilization of resources, better international research opportunities, improved research governance, outcomes aligned with national priorities, and improved rankings, rankings of universities I meant, So these will be the natural outcome if we create these kind of clusters. Another thing which really bothers me quite a lot is that in India, we don't seem like being science somehow has ceased to be in public imagination. If you ask even a STEM student that who are the top 5 scientists in the country today, most of them will not be able to tell. Perhaps after Dr. APJ Kalam, there's hardly any top-level scientist in public imagination in our country, which is a matter of big concern. If you look at any TV channel, Doordarshan or NDTV or India Today TV or any channel, in 24 hours, you'll be shocked. Very often, you'll not find even a single science and technology news. Look at a newspaper like the Hindu or Deccan Herald, Deccan Express, or Times of India, or Hindustan Times, Economic Times. Any newspaper you pick up, a Mint, you'll be shocked that in the entire paper you will not find any science and technology news. I mean, there could be some exceptions, but most days they will not have any science and technology. They may have a news about Google or Microsoft, but those are the commercial news, not and business news, not so much as the technology news. I think so. This is very, very important to bring science back into public imagination. If you look at books, don't get written. If you look at movies, don't get made around science and technology. I was very happy to see on OTT a movie called, a web series called Rocket Boys. This is based on the lives of Vikram Sarabhai, Homi Bhabha, and a young APJ Kalam. How they, despite very, very low resources in the British India, and later when India became independent, how they really traveled the extra mile to ensure that the country gets what it gets. And therefore, in two areas that collectively they looked at, both atomic energy as well as, Indian space research, the space sector, satellites, and so on and so forth. I think India has done a remarkable job, much better than what other sectors have shown, with the possible exceptions of IT and pharma. So I think we have to bring science back into public imagination. I remember when I did my class 12, and for those of us who didn't want to become an engineer or doctor, the most obvious line was to get into physics honors in a course. Today, if you look at a 12th student, class 10, 12th student, the most obvious choice the person would have would be, economics honors or commerce, and fewer and fewer people will go for physics, chemistry, or mathematics, or these kind of things. So why is it that in this country science has gone away from public imagination? Because our scientists don't talk to the community, don't talk to the people. The labs and universities don't reach out to the citizens at large. So, in my current organization, we have started something called India Science Festival, which has become within 3-4 years has become the largest non-governmental platform for public celebration of science. So more and more such initiatives are required, to my mind, to bring science back in mainstream. I think that's very, very important. We need to create world-class universities, improve research rigor, create a research rigor in the university. Sorry. And so on and so forth. I think that's very, very important. I would think India should make a dream that we would have at least 10, at least 5 universities in the top 100 in the QS ranking, and 10 in top 200, and perhaps 25 in top 500 in next 3-4 years time. That's very, very important. And what all it needs, not just more faculty recruitment, but create better perception about our education, improve the teacher-taught ratio, improve citations per faculty, and do lots of things to improve the research rigor in our colleges. I think that's very, very important. Create a centralized research offices, industry liaison offices, fundraising offices, and so on and so forth. So that's very, very important. Have training interventions at the institutional level, and so on and so forth. So I can go on and on and on, but I suppose the format was first 30 minutes I will speak, and then I'll be open for question and answers, and so on and so forth. So fundamentally, I believe that Indian science and technology is a sleeping giant here. And India needs to wake it up big time, and that can only be done by bringing transformative reforms in the sector. So I'll stop there. This is a subject which is so close to my heart. I can go on speaking for 4 or 5 hours in a row. But I thought I'll give you an overall preamble as to what the sector lacks and what improvements are possible. And I'll stop here, and I'm okay for any questions that you may have. And sorry once again for a very, very, taking this call from a mall in a coffee shop rather than from an office or home, because I got thoroughly confused about the date being today or tomorrow. But I'm happy that I was audible and could still speak to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krishna. You've come across very well, though it's a mall. And I think you articulated the concerns as well as the context very well. I think, you have, just to give a very quick overview on what you've covered, you have mentioned that the world is driven by innovation-led It's an innovation-led world, and therefore science and technology plays a huge part. The other thing, which is at a very macro level, is that we have got excellent demographics, but it's nowhere near how it can serve the purpose. And I think another important point you made is that China invested back its benefits from reforms into S&T, while India has been lagging behind, and it's there. And I think you went on to lay out the terrain of where the weaknesses are and what could possibly be done. At this juncture, I'd like to invite Professor Sudhakar Rao if he has any comments, opening remarks, and then we can move to the next.
Yeah, good evening to you, sir. Dr. Jayant, Krishna, welcome once again. I have also got delayed for some unforeseen jam that has happened on my way to office. But I was catching up almost the entirety of your opening remarks, and it is amazing that you covered such a huge landscape of where do we figure now in terms of where we want to be and in terms of where we are currently. There's a huge gap. Aspirationally, one is fine, but in terms of getting those things underway to reach the goal, there seems to be a lot of gap, and what is required is something that you have recommended. For example, various indices globally where India is ranked is not very encouraging. On the other hand, we have a huge landscape of educational institutions, schools, colleges, institutes of higher learning and research is well spread out. But what has been highlighted by you is the importance of the output and the research output especially. It is not that we don't have talent. And very nicely you mentioned that we seem to be shining abroad but languishing here. So well, that's the theme of what has been. So how nicely we can make this environment conducive for research output on one hand. On the other, we need to get our act together in terms of our research output and collaborate with industry and other allied bodies. And there should be a national consensus with respect to this output, reaching the goals, like the politicians to bureaucrats to academics to citizens. I think there should be a consensus, and that's a major thing that you highlighted in the beginning. But towards the end of your opening remarks, you also mentioned how science has ceased to be in the public imagination. Yes, scientists are not talking to the citizens. That is actually not the center of discussions, neither for the news nor for the news readers. I mean, the consumers of the news. I think that connect has been lost. And
and just to add, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Technology wise, there are a lot of people who study technology. Not that they have love for technology, just because technology jobs are there. And largely in IT industry, almost all the engineers, more than half of them get sucked by IT industry itself. Even though they may not be computer science students, kind of thing. So they are going there because they see careers. Science, they do not go because the science is not in public imagination, and there are very few careers. You'll be shocked to hear there are just about 200 to 300, scientists who get absorbed by all labs of Government of India put together. Just per annum. As against that, in IT industry, this number is. Let me give you, because I've been in that industry for long, quickly estimate, that number will be, as against 200 or 300, there'll be about minimum of 3 to 4 lakh people joining the IT industry every year, at least. So you look at the difference. Sorry to have interrupted.
No, it's a fantastic point that strengthens the pitch that you're making today, Dr. Jayant, is that the public imagination is somewhere else, and the excellence of science is lying somewhere else. Yes, that's a very important point. People who are studying technology are studying technology for the sake of making it to the job market, rather than for the love of science and technology. Yes, that's a fundamental point, and it's amazingly told. So you have also given us the goals for the next, say, if the next decade is going to be the decade of transformation of science and technology, to take us to the level of pitching ourselves for this 5 to 10 trillion economy, to pitching us to the level of innovation-led economy that the world is around. The big giants that we talk about Are they politically the leaders? Are they leaders in terms of military? Are they leaders in terms of science and technology and research? Are they leaders in terms of, excuse me, in terms of the largest population? I think we need to be recognized for the right reasons as well. Therefore, it is a very, very strong requirement for us to understand this. I'm with you. It is a sleeping giant and it needs to be awakened. We will now take questions, sir. And I request all the members in the audience, we will come to you a little later. There are two clusters of questions. The first cluster is taken up by Professor Prasad himself. He will raise those questions, and the second round, I will come up with a few questions. And in between, we'll open the mic for the participants to talk directly to the leader here who has made time to discuss this very, very essential topic. Sir, this topic has attracted top-notch leaders today who are in the audience. They are from academics, they are from industry, they are from research. Some of them who have joined, I'm sure they also will have their questions to be raised directly with you. I'll request them to raise their hand when it comes to second cluster, and we'll take it at that time. But before we open the floor for the first cluster, I want to introduce and talk about Professor Prasad. Professor Prasad has been the director of academic wing at the ICFAI group, and he's also now heading and mentoring the online MBA program, which we launched last year, which is the #1 program in the country in terms of online MBA programs that have been launched in the last 1.5 years. Professor Prasad has a rich experience of 3 decades as an entrepreneur, as a corporate professional, as well as an academic. Professor Prasad holds a BTech from IIT Bombay and PGDM, which is MBA from the prestigious IIM Kolkata. Thank you, Professor Prasad. I was late, and thanks for standing in. I also welcome Professor Mahendra Reddy, who is the distinguished advisor to the ICFAI group and the entire battery of researchers who have joined from various institutions, not just ICFAI, even from outside. I welcome all of you once again, and without much delay, I request Professor Prasad to start the cluster #1. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor Rao. We are at a very interesting juncture where the stage has been set. And the first question is a bit personal, but I think very important. Dr. Krishna, you have been in IT for long, and then you have held numerous other assignments. Now, what brought about the passion that you currently hold? How did it emerge into what it is today? Because I feel a lot of people have that background and perhaps can contribute to this mission in a variety of ways. So your response will be helpful to us.
So it's a wonderful question, very well thought out. I fundamentally believe, this life comes to you but for once, kind of thing. So I was so comfortable in Tata Sons earlier, in consulting, then in TCS, where I had spent most of my time in pure software jobs. I was the regional director for UK and Ireland for 3 verticals. I was their pharma and life sciences and healthcare head for UK, for Europe. I was one of the head of one of the global delivery centers. Even the passport seva application that you see, which was done by TCS. So it was done in my delivery center. The entire build happened in my delivery center before it was sent to another center for user acceptance testing. So I think, Tata has always had the culture of giving back to the community, kind of a thing. So I also took up a role over and above my day job of the CSR, the corporate social responsibility of TCS in North India. And that excited me, and it gave me a satisfaction much more than what my regular day job used to give, And then what happened, a chance encounter with Professor C.K. Prasad from University of Michigan, who came to India under a mission called India at 75. This was sometime in 2006, 7, 8 kind of a time frame. And he was invited by the then Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and he tried to evangelize that what kind of country we would like to see by the time independent India becomes 75-year-old in the year 2022. Ironically, we are in that year, but much of that evangelization didn't see the light of the day. So I was very, very driven by it. And among other things, he said that we will need 500 million skilled people in the country by that time, and then what, as luck would have had it, when my TCS CEO, Mr. S. Ramadurai, when he superannuated, he was picked up by Dr. Manmohan Singh earlier and later by Mr. Narendra Modi, to be his advisor for skill development and given a cabinet rank. So he picked up 3 or 4 people, including me, from different Tata organizations and elsewhere, who became a part of his crack team for driving reforms in the skills and mainstream education space. And among other things that I got involved with was, which led to a new Act of Parliament, apprenticeship, the Indian Apprenticeship Act. I had the good fortune to spearhead to make it more industry friendly, and also worked in the National Skills Qualification Framework for seamless movement of students between the skill streams, the skill development stream, and the mainstream academics, kind of a thing. So I think, so this gave me an opportunity and a canvas which was very different. And, I could see whatever work we did, I'm not saying that we succeeded 100%, but whatever success we could bring on the table, it brought a lot of changes in the lives of many people, whose lives got touched. It transformed their lives. And, from a very, very deprived background, people from bottom of the pyramid, how they got skilled and how they got good jobs, and it changed the entire economic and social trajectory for not just the person, but the entire family. I think it was a very, very satisfying experience. And then I moved on to look at reforms, economic reforms required in India, which can create jobs. Earlier, I was more driven from the supply side, that, we skill people. Then I worked in a think tank in the US and the Silicon Valley a non-profit, Padwani Foundation, and look at those reforms, which can trigger job growth. I think, and now with the current job, the excitement of, transforming India and making it an innovation-led economy, the promise of that. I mean, I'm not a scientist, and if you said Dr. Jayant Krishna, technically I'm not a doctorate. Although I have doctorate, honorary doctorate from universities, but it's not an earned PhD by that's all. Technically I'm not a doctor. It's only an honorary PhD that I have. So what I'm trying to say is that there was again a huge opportunity to make the difference. See, this, once the bug has bitten you, what kind of bug to do something meaningful, more meaningful for the country, has bitten you, it's very difficult to go back to the industry. And I mean, I had all the comfort level in the industry: fat salary, good compensation, good growth opportunities, which I may not have even today. But I have the huge satisfaction of doing, changing, not just a few hundred or thousand, but lakhs of lives, which keeps me going, and that becomes a resolve that even while I superannuate in a couple of years down the line, I'll keep working for in whichever form I can do to make India a better country to live in.
Thank you. I think it gives a lot of fillip to a number of members who are in the audience and will be listening into the video. I think a lot of people have background to contribute. And I think the sense of purpose that you are highlighting repeatedly is coming out. And I hope that many other members join in.
And just to add, Tata Group was perhaps the best thing, that happened to, Mr. Jamshedji Tata, who was the founder of the group and the first chair of the group. He used to say that community is not just one of the stakeholders in business. The community is the very purpose of existence of business. Business must exist for the community. And JRD Tata used to talk about Prof. Tata Sons, which is the holding company, almost 2/3 of the Tata Sons is owned by philanthropic trust and not by the Tata family members, kind of thing. And therefore 2/3 of the profit, in terms of largely through dividend income of the various companies that comes to Tata Sons, it's plowed back into nation building through these philanthropic trusts. So JRD Tata used to say, about profits, what comes from the people must go back to the people many times over. I think, not every Tata employee gets influenced equally. But in my case, it really touched my heart, and it resonated so well with my thought process that I thought that having earned, achieved all financial goals and, well-being goals in life, last, 10, 15 years of my career, I should completely donate to the nation building process. I mean, not that, and there has to be an end to your greed to make more and more money, right? Otherwise, no amount of money is big enough. But, there has to be a stage when you are happy with what you have, and then get back to, see, I'm not saying through industry you don't contribute to nation building, you do, but this becomes a more direct contribution, kind of thing.
Excellent. I think the diminishing marginal utility of money and the
Exactly.
sense of values that you imbibe from the Tatas, which has come in and is flourishing right now.
Yeah. For example, like Tata's always believed that austerity, for example, austerity is a virtue. It is not something that you should be ashamed of. So I think a lot of things, they enter your DNA. I feel if you really absorb those values in letter and spirit. Excellent.
The next question, sir, is about the current architecture that you have. Though you have touched upon it when you presented, what is the current ecosystem that we have in S&T, science and technology? And if there is a priority that you need to put in based on your experience, what are the gaps that you'll address first?
Yeah. So again, a wonderful question. So as I said, we are trying to see that our science and technology research institutions improve their research rigor and robustness. That improves the function. And once that improves, we are very, very sure that, their ranking and their contribution to innovation will improve. I think that's a fundamental to it. Second is, ease of doing research has to improve very substantially for researchers in the country. As I said, many of them crib that almost 2/3 to 3/4 of their time goes into managing the administrative treasury and not focus on research. So multiple things that go into improving ease of doing research. Helping the government. See, government today is very, very open to help from independent think tanks or think act tanks like Fast India that I work for. And helping the government for some of their initiatives. There are 6 direct science and technology ministries in Government of India. Department of Science and Technology, Biotechnology, CSIR, Atomic Energy, which one your Earth Sciences, and Department of Space. These are 6 ministries directly under science and technology. So most of them are very open to solicit help from us, because they need assistance not only in ideating but even implementation on the ground. We are doing some work with the Capacity Building Commission, and also how do you bring science back into public imagination, as I said earlier. So these are the kind of things. The vehicles that we use are policy reforms, policy and reforms, government assistance, science communication, institutions, and industry, where we have not done much work so far. But very clearly, industry also needs to be exhorted so that they spend more on research and development in science and technology. Industry doesn't do as much as what they do in the other countries. So that part we have parked because it's still a new organization. But we will perhaps the next financial year we'll have focus on that as well.
Fantastic. I think you have highlighted some very specific measures which can be taken up immediately. Now, coming to some, India may not have too many success stories as of now, but if you also look at the immediate future and combine it with the past, would you be able to highlight some success stories either there or in its way emerging, where you think this kind of thing is coming into place?
See, if you look at till a couple of years back, let's say the kind of resolve that IIT Bangalore, IIT Bombay, and IIT Delhi made, for the first time, they, till about few years back, they were not in top 200. They have really worked upon to address their gaps, to have emerged among the top 3 institutions in the, in the country, and among the global QS ranking of in the top 200. So that's very good work which has happened. some of the philanthropy money, people like Chris Gopalakrishnan, people like Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, the kind of work, the kind of investments they have made in research and development is very, very important. Some discussions are on with groups like Shell, which is not an Indian group, but how can they leverage India big time for research? Like the entire world leverages India as a IT back office destination. Why can't global companies leverage India and the cost arbitrage and the talent availability? Why can't we become not just for our own industry, research and development, not just for our own industry, but why can't we become the research back office for the entire world? I think these are some changes. Some of the names that I took, those things have happened. There's a capacity building commission which has been created by the Prime Minister, which is trying to help not just the science and technology ministries but all across. That how do you create the capacity of people who staff these ministries? So that they deliver what the country requires. So I think there are lots of such things. But as I said, it's up to us whether we see it as a glass half empty or half full. And there's a long way to go, but I think some baby steps are getting taken. Some clusters have been created. What I said. Right now, thematic clusters have been created in few cities, including Delhi, and Hyderabad and some other places, where to ensure collaboration between amongst universities, science and technology labs and industry. Some small steps have been taken, but we clearly have a long, very, 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 very long way to go.
Fantastic. There are more questions at this stage, but I'll hand it to Professor Rao. We are at about 7:33 p.m.
Good. Thank you very much, sir. It's a wonderful discussion. If members have any questions to raise, they may probably raise their hand. In between, I'll take a few questions. We have received these questions at the time of registration from participants, and those questions are kind of application-oriented questions as to how we can look at various sectors. So the first question, sir, is about, could you please tell us how we can use this technology and innovation in agriculture sector to boost crop productivity? One of the participants wanted to know this.
So, I think it's again a great question. See, while we are not focusing much directly in our organization on agriculture so far, because we are using much of our interventions for science and technology as a horizontal. Those like ease of doing research improves. Improvement will happen in defense and agriculture, in medical research, everywhere. So that's our thought process right now. But agriculture research, I think we have, from a very early childhood, we were told that, we are an agriculture-centric society. See, agriculture contributes just about 15-16% to our GDP. And how many people are dependent on agriculture and allied industries? It's almost close to half of the population, kind of thing. Sorry, it is almost, almost half of the population is dependent on agriculture and allied industry, including farm laborers and people like that kind of thing. So you can imagine if half the population is contributing just about 16% instead of 50% to the GDP, is contributing just 15 to 16% of the GDP. The per capita income in agriculture pulls the per capita income of the entire country down because it's much lower than the country's average. And the reasons are very clear. We have suboptimal land holdings, where most of the farmers, have suboptimal land holdings. Look at the productivity. Even in key crops like wheat and paddy, our productivity is much lower than the US, the Canada, China. In many cases, our productivity is half of what these countries are able to achieve. And it's not that we have not, like in Punjab, for example, the wheat productivity the country has been able to get is almost 70-80% to the international best productivity figures. So wherever we have done focused effort and there's a reasonable agroclimatic zone, we have delivered. There's been a fruit revolution in the country, milk revolution. There's a, why is it that we, despite being the world's largest producer of milk, through the white revolution, why is it that we are nowhere in the international markets in cheese, in condensed milk, and value-added products using milk, because that's where the margins are more, than selling milk as milk, kind of a thing. So I think a lot of research needs to take place. I fundamentally believe we have had a green revolution in our own country, led by Dr. M.S. Swaminathan. So we have examples like that. But we really need to. India with such large number of population dependent on agriculture and light industry, we can truly. I fundamentally believe if we do research well and plow back that research from labs to farm, that deployment happens very fast. I'm sure that India can become the food capital, the food bowl of the entire world. I fundamentally believe.
Great. So in spite of having so many advantages, in spite of having a fundamental base to various success stories like in agriculture, the revolution that we have brought about in terms of food, in terms of farming, in terms of dairy, in spite of all these, we have actually not competed with the world enough. On the other hand, our productivity itself has not been showing up in comparison to some of the large farming productive countries around the world. So thank you very much, sir, for that. The next question is again interesting. In order to bring about better impact in developing health technologies, what are the measures do you suggest that are needed for the merger of technology and health sciences so that we bring about better impact in developing health technologies?
See, if you look at, India spends a very, very small percentage of its GDP on healthcare. If memory doesn't fail me, it is just about 1.3 to 1.5% of our GDP we spent on healthcare, kind of a thing. All developed countries spend anywhere between, 6, 7 to 10, 12% of their GDP on healthcare. So I think we have to increase our spend levels big time. See, we are a country of paradoxes. Why, as I said earlier, why is it that every fifth or sixth doctor in NHS UK is from India? Why is it that in our own country, hospitals like Breach Candy, hospitals like Polo, like Medanta, these are the hospitals where, if you look at in many of their centers, almost 30-40% patients that they have are patients who come from abroad, because Indian doctors have been able to mastermind a very productized and packaged services like hip replacement, like heart valve replacement, or open heart surgery, or angioplasty, angiography and angioplasty. So our people have been able to do a fantastic job of productizing it with the process rigor, which even developed countries have not been able to do, and at a much lower cost point. So I think, you sometimes you feel as if it's not one country, there are two countries which coexist within one, one country where doctors rub shoulders with the best in the world, kind of thing. And the other country where people don't even get the basic healthcare parameters, So I would say that, there has to be a greater connect between these two imaginary Indias within the same country. And secondly, you have to improve the spend that we have on healthcare as a percentage of GDP to at least, I would say, 4% of our GDP. That's very, very important. Otherwise, and mind you, because much of the healthcare system is a government, there are a lot of leakages also, that happens, and the money doesn't need the end patient. So I think these are combination of things. Look at pharma, for example. It is a related sector to healthcare. In pharma, we have done pretty well. But still, if you look at active pharma ingredients, APIs, that's where we still bulk of things we import from markets like China and Germany, US, and so on and so forth. Whereas India accounts for almost 20% of all pharma exports worldwide. Vaccines, almost half of the vaccines the entire world manufactured by volume are made in India, are actually produced in India. During COVID time, we saw that when the country believed in science and technology, how we could come up with at least 2 of our home vaccines. One was purely homegrown, another was used AstraZeneca and Oxford formula done in the UK and did it. So I think it's a huge. See, even in the best of breed institutions like All India Institute of Medical Sciences, where you have such a rich patient data, clinical trials data, and other things which are available, still we do not, while there's a lot of hands-on work, but less of, research happening there. I think so, because we are not able to massage that data and plow back that into newer healthcare interventions. I think that's what is making our healthcare sector. So India is a country where 1 million mutinies are waiting to happen, healthcare being one. And I fundamentally believe we have to reduce the gap between two extremes of very good corporate hospitals where you get world-class healthcare and a primary health center or a district hospital at the village or district level. Huge gap, and that gap, as I said earlier, can largely be addressed if you spend more. Because if you throw peanuts, you'll get monkeys.
Amazing. That's a very, very comprehensive response to the question on improving the impact of health technologies by merging basic technology with health sciences. I think the pointers or the solutions that you've identified are very interesting in terms of moving forward. One, at an administrative political level, at a national priority level, in terms of spending the GDPs, those spends have to be much higher in comparison to what's happening around the world. On the other hand, a lot of hands-on work is happening in prestigious institutions of health, but research needs to be completely understood and plowed back for creating newer interventions in healthcare. I think those brilliant points have come up now in this discussion. Sir, I would like to request Professor Mahendra Reddy to ask a question and a point here. Professor Mahendra Reddy has been the Vice Chancellor of ICFAI Foundation for Higher Education, which is the flagship university. It's a deemed university in our group, and he's now the distinguished advisor. I'll request Professor Mahendra Reddy to come in.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir.
Sir, at the outset, I want to congratulate you for an excellent lecture. I think it's very important for the nation. Sir, as you know, and you mentioned in your lecture about the national education policy, and I wish to tell you the entire country, all the 1,000 universities are now engaged in implementation of the national education policy. I wish you were there on the implementation committee of the national education policy. Now, what are your suggestions for these universities? And this is the right time so that they can incorporate in their implementation plans to achieve the goals of the scientists which you have mentioned, as well as more and more innovations. You see, how do we go about implementation, and how do we go about increasing the number of universities of excellence? You see, what is it that we can do so that universities, there may be some vice chancellor hearing to you, they may incorporate that their perspective plan, their what is called IDP, Institutional Development Plan, 15-year plan, what the vice chancellor has in mind to the growth of the university. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Sudhakar, for the opportunity.
Sure. So was this a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I think as you rightly said, Professor, I see a lot of promise in new education policy on multiple fronts. One is that they have talked about the focus on only research universities where, undergrad teaching is secondary, but primary purpose of their existence is research, like Stanford, like MIT abroad, kind of a thing. So I think that's one good focus. Other is the National Research Foundation that they have talked about, creation of this body for funding of research proposals, and and they have talked about a budget of almost 50,000 crores spent over 5 years. This is another good thing. they've talked about vocationalization of secondary of education, and secondary education, higher education, both, how do they ensure the percentages differ, but they have even talked about certain percentage of all students in secondary education as well as higher education should take up vocational courses, in skill development courses, and so on and so forth, which is very, very important. That if we mainstream skills, I think things are going to improve. There's a focus on employability skills all across. There's a focus on internships and apprenticeship big time, that, they've talked about how internships need to be compulsory for undergrad programs and so on and so forth, which is largely there only in engineering and business management courses, but by and large, it's not there for humanities or pure sciences and so on and so forth. So I think all these are very, very important changes to my mind, directional changes. How do we improve our learning outcomes in primary education, secondary education, everywhere, but again, like healthcare, I would say what money we spent on education, private sector may still be in a slightly better position, but government sector, we spend just about, if memory doesn't fail me, almost 3.5% of our GDP we spend on education. Government spends on education. Of course, private sector is separate, and this has to go up to at least 6%, unless we will spend. See, new education policy has a lot of promises, lot of promises they have made. But are these promises good enough? I think what is important is to see, that how do we, to convert promises into action, you need money, especially in government institutions, you need money, So unless we spend more as a percentage of GDP on education, it's not going to happen. How do we train the trainers? How do we, I still remember that, today, a lot of people do not come to academics for their love for teaching. I'm sorry to say this word at a university forum, but many of them, it becomes a last refuge for unemployables in the country. Not all. There's still some exceptional teachers that you get. But you also have a fair number of teachers who got into academics for no love for academics. So I think all that has to change. You have to incentivize people to get into education. You can't expect people to be in academics, and leave aside very high-paying jobs in the industry. You can't expect the brightest of the people in academics unless you compensate also. I think all these things, to my mind, put together can bring the worthwhile results. See, mind you, what, as I said, a lot of people everything is not lost in our country. Lot of people who do their first degree in the country, they head companies like Google's and Microsoft's. Can you imagine? So why can't we, this creamy layer that we have? So, the biggest quarrel I have with the new education policy is the gap between IITs, IIMs, ISC kind of education and an average university is so huge, kind of a thing. They have talked about improving this layer a bit, but how does this layer come up? I think this layer, the lesser universities, the lesser colleges, and more than 1,000 of them, unless their lot improves, there's a huge gap between them and the creamy layer in the country, kind of a thing. So that is very, very important to my mind. I can go on and on, but these are some of the thoughts that I had.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for asking that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Very interesting question, and those responses are clear. Action points have been identified in terms of working on learning outcomes that are important for creating excellence in institution building, and at the same time, higher spending as a percentage of GDP in education by government will also have to go up. Otherwise, promises remain promises, and it will not convert into results without money. So,
absolutely.
While the question was about a lot of good institutions trying to take the average up, the reality probably is somewhere because of structural, because of financial hurdles, and also environmental hurdles, we're actually not being able to make that leap. So that's a very, very important discussion that's happening. And how beautifully it's been summarized by you, that the huge underbelly of education landscape, which has to improve, not just the creamy layer, that is when India improves. So thank you so much on that, sir. We will now request Mr. Arun Kaul to raise his question. Over to you, Mr. Kaul.
Thank you, Mr. Jayant Krishna. That was a wonderful talk that you've given. You see, my opinion is that we need to catch people at a very young age. And while you were talking, I was reminded that way back in 1965, when I was in school, there used to be a science talent search program of the government of India. And I remember it very distinctly because they made a films division documentary. They came to a school and made a documentary called Scientists of Tomorrow, in which I also acted. So that memory is there. But what I'm saying is that maybe that is the right stage to get people interested in science and technology. And as you said, a lot of students are going today into commerce, doing BCom and things like that, and not opting for science subjects. So is that program of Science Talent Search still alive? And I think it was a wonderful program. Shouldn't we encourage that? I mean, in your opinion, I'm not aware whether it's still alive or it's dead now.
I think that's a wonderful question you've asked, Dr. Kaul. Even I don't know whether it's alive or not. I'll check with the Government of India what's happening, because I think if I'm not mistaken, that program used to be masterminded by NCERT. I'll figure that out. There used to be a national talent search exam.
Yeah, but science talent research exam.
Correct. So let me find that out. I don't really know what's happening to that program, but I completely agree with you. At least to identify the brightest of the students, there should be something akin to it, kind of thing.
I thought that is the right age to catch people and get them interested in science and take that stream in their life rather than, not knowing anything about what with so many CSIR institutes and ICR institutes, which are there almost, I think, 65 plus or whatever. I think it's a wonderful.
There are 400 of them all put together.
Oh, I see. Yes. And this is, I think, not counting the defense organizations which are there, So that base was created long back, I think 60, 70 years back in our country, but we've not used it. I think implementation is the main the problem rather than having schemes and having ideas. That's my take on it.
And Dr. Kaul, if you remember, I don't know whether you were there earlier, I did mention we are the only country of this size or, of some size and above, where our universities and science and technology labs of the kind that you just mentioned of CSIR, of DBT, of DST, of DRDO, of ICR, they exist in two different universes, In most countries abroad, science and technology labs are a part of the university. Majority of them are a part of the university system, kind of thing. In our country, we have kept them apart, and they don't see eye to eye. They don't generally see work hand in hand. And at a time when research all over the world is becoming more collaborative, more cross-domain, more interdisciplinary, our scientists and academicians, they work in silos in research. So it's a huge issue. But I'll check on the fundamental point that you raised about the National Science Talent Search. What's happening? Is there any such program on? And pardon me for my ignorance, because we just got lost into so many other things that it's a huge space, so many corrections to be made. We didn't pay attention to this one, but I think thanks for reminding me that. I'll surely have a look.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaul, for raising that wonderful question. And the fact that you are trying to emphasize is that we need to catch them young through these interventions like NTSC or National Talent Research or search examination. So very good. Even I have forgotten whether it existed or not. I had written myself the NTSC, but I am not aware of the other one. So yes, we all need to figure it out. Thank you, sir. The next question I will take is a question asked by one of our participants. What are the how far have FASTags been successful in the transport sector?
I mean, technology-wise, I see a lot of promise in that, but how much it has succeeded on the ground, I don't have data of. I'm the wrong person to. I think you can check with the Ministry of Surface Transport. I don't know. I fundamentally anything it leverages technology. It should succeed, but I don't have the data on the ground.
Well, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. There's one more question that is interesting. How do we develop scientific temper among students? It's also related to partly to a question asked by one of our participants just now. But on a whole, as an advisor, as a suggestion, how do we develop scientific temper among students?
I think that's again a brilliant question. I know I don't know whether I have all the answers, but some of them I surely have. By bringing science back into public imagination, as I said, by through science communication, have more science quizzes. You have all these scientific labs, 400 of these Government of India ones, and all countrywide labs of almost 1400 put together. They should be thrown open for schools, kind of a thing. If not on all days, at least one day every week. Right now, they do it once a year on National Science Day or National Technology Day or something like that. It should be available for the students. Some of the classes should happen in these labs. I mean, you'll talk about electron microscope, but nobody has seen what electron microscopes are. And in most of the cities, bigger cities like which have labs like Hyderabad, Pune, Bangalore, Lucknow, Delhi, in all these cities, you have multiple institutes which have electron microscopes. They can go and see for themselves what it is, kind of thing. So I think there's a lot science festivals. Scientists have to be trained how to talk to people. Newspapers have to be told that this is very important part of creating a scientific temper. You must write about science. TV channels have to talk about it. Please move. Even if you can't move away from the Saas Bahu serials, at least have some space created for science and technology. I think more popular science. I'm not talking about textbooks, but popular science books need to be created. We are trying to develop a science fellowship, a book fellowship for that, kind of a thing. How do we incentivize people to write popular science, So I think a lot of these things put together have to happen. When I was a kid, I remember there used to be I don't know any of the senior professors, do they remember? There used to be a Calcutta Doordarshan program called The Quest in black and white TV days, where some of these scientists from schools and colleges, teachers used to come and conduct experiments live in the studio, kind of a thing, and ask questions, engage with people. I thought it was so inspiring. Why they have done away with it, God knows, kind of a thing. So all these things have to happen simultaneously. Why can't, you look at Rocket Boys. I strongly recommend, I think it's on Sony or one of the OTT channels. You just watch Rocket Science. You'll see how Homi Bhabha, Vikram Sarabhai, and a young APJ Kalam, they had the capability to go and negotiate with the likes of JRD Tata, that let Tata's fund something in atomic energy, which becomes a cradle for India's atomic energy space. They could go and negotiate with Pandit Nehru, who was the Prime Minister. They could negotiate with the British Viceroy. That why science is important. Today's scientists, even if they go and meet a joint secretary in Government of India, they'll be, there's a fair chance that the person will be thrown out. That why have you come? It's not my job. Don't bother me, kind of a thing. So how the entire we have to just create the temperament everywhere. Everywhere we have to look at science and technology. Unless we had deployed science and technology during COVID pandemic in our country, there were some gaps also in deployment. I'm not saying it was a perfect job, but at least people did, used science and technology and research and modern manufacturing techniques, because of which, we only lost, let's say, 5 or 6 lakh people instead of some, 50, 60 lakh people India could have lost, or some people say even a couple of crore people India could have lost. So wherever we have deployed science and technology, but we do not, once COVID gets over, people gravitate to their own comfort zones and again forget about science and technology. The entire country during COVID days was on TV channels, there were experts like Dr. Guleria from Indian Institute of Medical Sciences, Gagandeep Kang, a lot of scientists, Sonia Swaminathan, these people were addressing people. So during pandemic, you had all the ears for scientists, and when the pandemic gets reduced, you forget about science, kind of a thing. So I think it's, lots of things need to happen together. That's very, very important,
Great points and suggestion that you have mentioned, sir. Some of these well-established labs need to be thrown open to schools, and students should have access to these labs. Some of the classes should actually take place in these labs, if not every day, at least once in a week, and such wonderful measures that you have suggested. But on the other hand, what is required is the leadership also to steer forward this movement of science or celebrating science. It's a leadership issue. One is at the tactical level, other one is at the strategic level, where leadership along the lines that we had witnessed in Vikram Sarabhai and others in the initial days of our march towards bringing about transforming science and technology and trying to harness SMT for the development of the nation. I think such an impact or has to actually happen with leadership coming up at that level as well. So very nice points, sir. Wonderful discussion. At this stage, what I request is, I request Professor Prasad if he has any questions, and we can probably discuss one or two of that.
Yes, I think, there is a question which arises at this stage. A lot of things which are not getting done and some things which are getting done. What do you think are the challenges inherent in the system, whether it's at the policy making level or at the grassroots level, which are limiting this? So and there is a specific question associated with this from one of the participants. And the question is, what are the challenges in implementing economic reforms in science and technology in the present context?
I think it is the failure of the scientific community to do the benefit selling, as in the corporate sector, in the business management language, you call it benefit selling. We have not been able to package that, if you do these reforms, these are the benefits that the nation will accrue. And there'll always be some phase lag between investment in science and the research happening and the commercialization of the research. But in 5-6 years time, you will have as much part of the economy, getting funded through innovations in the country. I mean, I'll like to give you an example of Apple. Apple iPhones, more China manufactures many more Apple iPhones than the US, right? But for every Apple iPhone manufactured in China, I'm told, and if memory doesn't fail me, the economic value add that accrues to China for every phone that it manufactures is just about $10 per phone. And for every every Apple iPhone manufactured in China, the economic value add happening in the US is anywhere between the lower model $30 to $40, the higher model $60 or $50 to $60 per phone is the economic value add. Why? Because the intellectual property is owned by the companies in the US, kind of a thing. So I think it's in the world to in future times, that country which holds intellectual property is the one which will ensure the maximum economic value accrues to that country, and manufacturing can happen anywhere else, kind of a thing. So so the US is shedding some of the manufacturing, like example, the IBM Lenovo laptops are not manufactured in US any longer, right? Almost entirely pocketed by China, kind of thing. So while it helps in China, it adds to the GDP numbers, it creates jobs, but the wealth of the nation is gauged by the economic value add, which happens much more in the country, the country of origin of the IP.
I think in this aspect, I had an associated question which is getting discussed in our forums, and it's about making of chips in India and the associated R&D. Do you have any thoughts on this?
So, my former boss and the mentor, Dr. F.C. Kohli, who was not not just the founder, CEO of TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, but he's also regarded as the father of Indian IT industry. He showed the way, and that's how TCS, Wipro, Infosys, all these Cognizant, all these companies came into being, kind of thing. So he used to say one fundamental mistake India as a country did was that it did not focus on microelectronics as an area. And therefore, we never, because of lack of focus on that, we never became a hardware manufacturing hub. He says IT is not just software, but hardware we should have focused on. And he kept on, he would have spoken to Indira Gandhi, to Charan Singh, to Rajiv Gandhi, all kinds of prime ministers he used to meet and focus, but somehow they never understood the importance of that. One drawback was that for microprocessors, for microelectronics, I would say, the minimum economic size of a unit has to be huge. That size is huge for the unit to be viable, kind of a thing. And that you can't just make investment if you are for India's consumption, kind of a thing. You have to have it for countries in the region. They have to be consumers of that. So I think one semiconductor complex unit in public sector was set up in Chandigarh. It completely got burned. So then the rest is history. So I think that has been a setback. But now there is a semiconductor mission which Government of India has embarked upon, and I'm hopeful it's a bit late. Look at countries like Taiwan, what kind of advances they have made in semiconductors, kind of thing. I think I would say the world order is changing because of China's lack of respect for intellectual property, their geopolitical posturing, and so many other things, and the big brother attitude. A lot of companies, a lot of nations and companies are thinking, global multinationals are thinking of moving part of their manufacturing value chain away from China, and that's a huge opportunity for a country like India, which is essentially a peace-loving country, still largely operates on legal terms when it comes to protection of intellectual property. I think if semiconductor, if the this semiconductor mission is done properly, I see India could rekindle its lost ground.
Thank you for the hope ahead for the semiconductor industry. I think this also highlights the feature of what you call benefit selling for politicians, which you said that Kohli did.
Package the benefits well so that they understand that if they do that, what is the benefit the country can reap.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is maybe it's better than earlier, but it's in short supply even today.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Back to Professor Rao.
Thank you very much. So, Professor Prasad, I have one more question. Earlier in the discussion, we were talking about institutions of higher learning focusing on learning outcomes and interesting methodologies that have been adopted or should have been adopted to bring that about. Maybe you can highlight a couple of points that the academic wing and yourself at the institute level have been focusing on at one hand. On the other hand, your own view on the most important aspect here is if a few institutes in this country actually champion this, it is not enough, and the large underbelly still actually languishes. So that also you can keep in mind when you're commenting on this. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, my research is on this area, and it is addressed to the second level, not to the top level. This is apart from whatever ICFAI has done for that mid-level and the experiences that we have gathered from that. I think the first and most important point is that we don't build institutions for context. So if you treat an institution which is sitting in Kakinada and try to make it on a ranking framework very similar to the IITs, it doesn't work with that sort of a framework. It needs to be a completely different. I mean, the paradigm needs to build in these differences, because there will be people at various levels of the value add. I mean, there will be the kind who does the IPR that Apple does and gains money for that. And there will be people who will be at the implementation level. So the universities and institutions also need to cater for this diversity, and India's certainly needs to, because of its huge demographics and mass, and most of them won't get at that top level, which the IITs and some of the premium institutions are doing. So therefore, I think there needs to be a focus on context. What context means here is the types of students who an institution attract. So the framework of the institution needs to build this in. Currently, it is not. Currently, what happens is there are some ideas which are there, which come in from the academicians who are leading the institution. They are good because of their experience. They won't fail, but they won't get as productive as if you personalize or customize it for the kind of target audience that you get. For instance, if you take, the kind of audience which go to the IITs, I think even some of the leading private universities will not get that audience. It'll be like that for quite some time till it becomes a Stanford, and that's quite a long way away. So if one tries to build that personalization, customization, as we call it in our language, into the context of the kind of students who are coming, I think a lot of problems will be solved. This is a less understood area. There are enough frameworks. Given the existing frameworks that NAC or NIRF does, it can still be adapted. And so I think that's a very important point. And here you'll have the regional, you'll have the national, and you'll have the international, and you'll have the domestic. All these contribute together. I think this is a very, very important point. And unless this happens, all institutions will try to be like the best institution, and it won't work in a large country like India. I think that's the first point. I think if that point is understood, the second point, and this is what we are implementing. I mean, there's nothing, it's common sense, there's nothing great about it, but I find that it has worked. Even in the past, when we took it for the mid-level institutions, and even for what we are doing for the, the online MBA, I think you need to understand and think from your learner point of view. You can get to learner outcomes if you only think from the learner point of view. So you need to give a lot of variety to learners. I mean, you can't have, standard packaged approach to them and assume that everyone will understand from what one lecturer is saying. See, the problem also is that, if you have a prof from the IIT who teaches these, the second rung institution students, I'm not too sure what the efficacy of that is. It's good, but it doesn't motivate the student to come to an outcome, which is why you can see that in SWAYAM, the outcome rates are very low. In management, it's as low as 1.6%. The best are teaching, but why is it that the outcomes are low? Motivation is low, connect is low. You start inspiration, but you're not able to understand further. So you need to immerse into the context, and you have to build your entire value chain at the curriculum design and the pedagogy level. You have to know how to embed all this in. And it's possible, given the kind of people who are in each institution, it's very much possible, but we have to empower them to do that and not talk only about the best rankings in the country. Thank you.
Oh, very, very well said.
Okay.
Wonderful points there, Professor Prasad. That is building institutions for the context, because earlier also we've been discussing, Dr. Jayant was mentioning, this is India with multiple Indias within. There are segments, there are contexts, there are all kinds of learners, and therefore institutions have to be built to take care of all of them. One at the IP level, one at the design level, other at the manufacturing level or the execution level, so to say, for an example. These are wonderful points that you have mentioned. So the entire value chain has to be dovetailed to bring about these efficiencies and harness these efficiencies for the development of the nation. So that's beautifully put as Dr. Jain. Any thoughts, any reflections on this, sir? You would like to add any point?
No, not me.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have one more question asked by Mr. Shankar A. I'll request him to ask the question directly. Mr. Shankar.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Jayant and Prasad and Sudhakar. See, my question raised from the recent entrance test that my son has attempted during last month by Akash Institute. That's from where I got this whole thought happening. So we are seeing so many schools, or he's into 7th standard now. Okay. So we are seeing so many schools or institutes trying to identify talent early and imparting training, mostly commercial terms. Okay. Interestingly, when the results were declared yesterday, a single statement came that your son has qualified. But to understand the analysis, please visit our branch and discuss with our counselor. Okay, and that's a more on a business term or a commercial factor. So why can't the government, having so much of a data, because they manage so many things in terms of the reforms and policies that are being made, why can't such measures be taken by government, or if at all it is taken, what are the measures taken by the government or policy or reforms in bringing such a practice at school level more as a responsibility than allowing it to become a commercial tool to address the balance sheet by various mediums that we are seeing today?
Yeah, very interesting thing you've raised. I think there is no other place on this planet where Kota, in Rajasthan, right?
Yes,
where the IIT factories run.
Right.
I would call them factories,
Right.
and where, I think it's a shame. It's a shame for we as a country that we attach so much of premium to IIT education. And, and this, the kind of focus in middle class families and even in lower middle class families to be able to, that the sons and daughters get into IITs is so huge, kind of a thing. I think it's a shame because, if you look at what you're doing in the process, you're killing your child, the child in your son or daughter. You're killing the child in your son and daughter by putting him or her to that rigor. I would think the challenge lies, the governments have to rise to the occasion. The private sector entrepreneurs who are the Akashas and the equivalents and the fidgety or whatever that's called, I don't even know. All these institutions have to really sit together and feel we have to devise a mechanism where, as long as the child studies the regular board exam, be it CBSE or ICSE or state vernacular board or whatever, that board exam people study, they should have mechanism to figure out the aptitude for a career in technology and engineering. And based on that aptitude, the creamy layer gets picked up for IIT, then the RECs, the private sector ones, and that kind of thing. That's very, very important. That's one part of it. Second part to it is even parents have to realize that, getting into IIT is not everything in life, right? Kind of thing. How many in Kota, do you know how many suicides happen every year after the JEE results are declared? I think it's at least I'm very clear. I just have one child. And he did study science, mathematics, physics, chemistry, mathematics, and other subjects till class 12. But he was very clear, doesn't want to become an engineer. I never subjected him to that kind of this thing. And then he branched out off to economics, then development studies. Now he's doing his PhD on a very high impact area. So I think that's one. Second thing is, for a country, see, IITs today are the toughest. The JEE is the world's toughest entrance exam for any course. Any course. Look at them in terms of numbers, in terms of input-output ratio, in terms of difficulty quotient, and so on and so forth. I think the solution lies, to my mind, that a lot of IITs we need to create. If India has to become the technology supplier, the supplier of engineers and technologists to the world, which to a large extent is already done in the information technology industry, I think we need to increase the number of IITs manifold. Some changes have happened. It used to be only 6 IITs, now there are 23 IITs. Some changes have happened, but I think we have to increase it more. It's a question of even IITs don't get funded as much, as much as the government universities in the US, for example, or the Ivy League colleges among those which are in the government space in the universities in the US get funded either on a per capita, per student basis, whichever way you look at. They are funded much more than the IITs. So I think we need to create more IITs, pump in more money into education, so that this mad rush, and a dog eat dog kind of a competition for IIT entrance, it reduces substantially. I'm not against removing rigor amongst our students and the spirit of competition, which which gives India a lot of differential edge as a nation. I'm not against that, but this I'm completely against subjecting them to this kind of a pressure right from a class 6 or 7 onwards, and so that it is virtually killing the child in your son or daughter in pursuit of an IIT admission. I fundamentally believe that.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, sir, for that question, as well as the amazing response that you have given. It appears that we have taken more time than we have actually sought from you, sir. However, we will conclude now. I assume that there are no more questions at this stage. If there are any, we will write to you and seek your reply by email. I'm sure you will help us on that. For now, I would like to summarize. There are lots of points that we have discussed. We are extremely thankful to you for this wonderful and patient conversation. These leadership conversations we hold every Friday evenings at 6:30 p.m. typically, and 1 week, one leader. And today we have been so fortunate to have your presence, your time and expertise, and your views on variety of matters on this very important discussion, how to transform science and technology and build an innovation-led economy for this country. So that's an amazing topic that we've started. A few bullet points I would like to capture so that those who join a little late also will be able to connect well. India, in spite of having large resources, in spite of having built basis for taking the leap forward, for example, demographic in terms of number of institutions of higher learning, in terms of talent, in terms of the positive atmosphere that is created because of the growth in growth in penetration of internet across the country, about all telephone density and things like that. In spite of all these things, we have not reached the goals that we have been looking for, and therefore that is something which has been set as a context to discuss further. There's some of the suggestions, a very interesting one. How do we build a conducive environment for our talent pool to flourish in this country the way they do when they travel abroad and study and work there? They seem to be doing quite well. So some of the suggestions have been to have a matching or improved compensation, and establishing research clusters, collaborative research that is required, and democratization of the resources that are already built. And of course, more have to be spent to create better resources as well. And science, on the other hand, science has to become center stage in public imagination. We need to reclaim that. Some leadership that has been there in the past has to actually we need to rediscover that, and therefore how we can build this country, which is a sleeping giant, which can be reawakened. The other interesting point that has come up is India needs to think of moving from a back office IT destination to a research back office for the world. I think that's an important and well-stated goal. We need to work on that and keep moving on that. In terms of health technology, we have discussed that on one hand, there are segments and there are two different countries where there are pockets of excellence, wonderful productization of health technologies for specialized services has been done very well at a lower cost in India. On the other, basic health itself is a distant dream for populations. So I think this has to be connected very well. We need to improve the spendings and also harness research properly and connect this. And in the area of pharma as well, a lot of API import that has been taking place is something which we need to make note of. The wonderful labs that we have established across the country under various heads will have to be thrown open to the students. Students have to be brought into this scene very early. Schools and colleges will have to connect with these labs. We no longer have to work in silos. That's been happening, and therefore that's the problem that's been identified very well. The operational, tactical, and strategic leadership is required at science level. We need to, what has been identified as failure of scientific community in benefit selling. That benefit selling is a major point that we discussed. This has not been communicated well. That you do reforms is equal to benefits in specific manner has not been communicated very well. On the other hand, the economic value add of a host country that produces IP is much more than the location where probably it is manufactured or executed. I think while it creates a lot of jobs, as in the example of iPhone manufacturing given for China, I think the economic value add for the country where the IP originated is much more. I think that's an important point we need to think as a leader to move forward. The large underbelly or the bottom layer of education segment will have to also move, and the averages will have to strengthen, not just the creamy layer where the reforms seem to be executed, implemented so easily. And all the time the talk is about that. Another beautiful point brought out by Professor Prasad is that if we have models, if we have the intent, and if we have dovetailed paradigms for the large segment of education where the learning outcomes will have to be focused, we need to bring about what is called building institutions for context, and then the entire value chain will have to be rediscovered accordingly. So that's another beautiful point that we have discussed. Semiconductor chips, I think this is one opportunity. It has potential for India to actually gain the lost ground. That is a very interesting point that we have talked about. So across all these points of response, as well as your opening remarks, sir, and also in response to questions raised by our participants, the discussion has been wonderful, very interesting, and quite what we call it WiseViews. It actually lives up to that whole theme that we are given to this thing. Thank you so much for this time that you have spent with us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And, I apologize once again for this confusion with the date and turning up 10 minutes late, and for being very, very casually attired. And if there's anything I could do for your university, I mean, I was very impressed with the quality of questions and interactions and discussions, which generally doesn't happen. It becomes a one-way traffic, which I really appreciate. And if there's anything I can do jointly with any of the professors, at your university, it will be a privilege and pleasure.
Amazing, sir. What a welcome invitation that you're given. We would love to work with you. We will connect with some of the professors and take this discussion forward, and we can definitely work together. We'll request you to visit us once at Hyderabad whenever it's convenient to you, and probably sit down and chalk out what is good for the society and what is good for the country will obviously be good for our institutions and research and all of us who are putting our heads together. Thank you so much on that count. And I also would like to thank these enthusiastic participants who are turning up week after week and raising these beautiful questions to make this discussion all the more interesting. I would like to thank each one of them. And next week at the same time, 6:30 p.m., we will be back with yet another leader, and we hope to learn much more. Let's keep learning and let's keep connecting. Please read more about Fast India and get into some kind of looking up and research on what Fast India does and why large departments in the government of India, ministries actually solicit their help. It's very interesting for us to know. So while you keep learning, do turn up next week at 6:30 p.m. on Friday on December 16th. We will wait for you. Thank you so much. All of you take good care and good night.